Now, before we do this, let's go over the ground rules. Rule number 1. No touching of the hair or face.
Of course.
And that's it! Now let's do this!
Booster.
Go.
Retro.
Go.
Vital.
We go fly.
Guidance.
Guidance, go.
Okay, man, let's turn and burn.
Launch control, this is Houston. We are go for launch.
Dive, dive, dive. Let's put the hammer down.
Intruder alert! Intruder alert!
Get off my bridge.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Roger that.
Are you ready for a war?
Now I'm really angry. This is fucking war.
Round up the usual suspects.
Follow me.
Certainly, what have I got to lose?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello! Hello, hello, hello.
Smoke and mirrors, guys. Welcome to the movie factory.
I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
I thought I told you never to interrupt me while I'm working.
Proceed.
Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Isn't it about time for somebody's favorite radio program?
There is nothing wrong with your radio. Do not attempt to adjust it or change the station. We are in control. We will control the frequency and amplitude modulation. We will control the super heterodyne matrix. We are in control, baby, so keep your hand off the nose.
Take it away, boss.
Yeah. Tonight it's live, okay? There is no 7-second delay. There is no, well, there's no turning back. There's no tape delay. There's no plan B. Tonight, I am working without Annette because Annette couldn't make it. Honestly, I'm loaded for bear and I am ready to fire at will. I don't know why. Will never did anything to me, but I'm ready to fire at will. But that's okay. Before the night is over, I promise that you will jump for joy until Joy gets mad and goes home, at which point we can all make merry until she gets mad and goes home. This is going to be a very unusual theater of the mind. Yes, I know. They're all unusual in their own strange, quirky way, but, well, this one more than any of the others. No, tonight there's not going to be any news of the weird. We're not going to have any little departments. We're not going to tell stories about Cletus and Frank, or any cute little story about when I was a kid. No, tonight it's going to be a combination of stark, raw-nerved reality and performance art. I leave it to you to tell the difference between the two. That line between fantasy and reality is a fairly fluid line anyway. And tonight I believe that line has broken down altogether. You hear tonight on your radio A Man Traumatized. I am a raw nerve sitting behind the console tonight, like living in a powder keg and giving off sparks. No, wait, that was a bad 80s song. Anyway, there are a few times in a man's life when he has to come face to face with who he is. And that is seldom a happy moment. It's never a happy moment when you have to contemplate your real history as opposed to the story that you tell yourself. By the way, do you know what your real history is? Do you, in fact, even have a history? I find that in the modern era, most people's histories go back roughly 2.5 weeks. They have very little memory of anything prior to that. And of course, the dangerous part of that lack of personal history is you have certainly learned no lessons. You can pretty much create whatever narrative you want about who you are and why you are who you are. Well, typically most people's historical narratives have a lot to do with being a victim of somebody. Yeah, if it wasn't for that crummy 1%, yeah, or them awful rotten Republicans, it's all their fault. You know, if I hadn't gotten that first crummy job, I would have written that novel. Yeah. You see, we're all the stars of our own movie, gang. Ultimately. But then again, there are times when we are brought face to face with who we really are. And that is what tonight is all about.
Let's kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Yeah. Tonight is Theater of the Mind old school. The way it used to was. I've been doing this now for about 5.5 years. And when it began, it was just me, sitting all alone in a room at night, in the dark, sending whatever came into my addled brain through that 85-watt blowtorch into the ambient air over Cape May. Now, you might think that creating novels live on the radio once a week is really an ephemeral sort of art. It's not the same as great literature, you might argue. No, you see, it's not the same as picking up a copy of Milton's Paradise Lost. Because my words go into the night air as I speak them and are gone. Now, yes, of course, I record the shows, and I certainly have an electronic copy, but it's not the same thing as great art. I'd argue that the contrary is quite true. Someday when this earth reaches the end of its life cycle, whether its end is caused by man or caused by nature, all the great works of literature, Milton's Paradise Lost, to name one, all of Shakespeare, for example, all of it, both the print and the electronic versions, will be gone. But things that were broadcast into the ambient night air, even things that were broadcast on a fairly modest 85-watt transmitter with its little humble antenna sitting on top of a water tower in North Cape May, or Wildwood Crest, I should say. Wildwood Crest. Even those humble transmissions go on forever. You did know that, right? And no, tonight's not going to be a geeky science show. But it is important to think about that for a second. Do you realize that every word that has ever been broadcast in either television or radio and sent into the terrestrial air still exists? It does. It's out there in space. And if you had a sensitive enough receiver and you were, well, let's say KDKA began to broadcast commercially in 1920. So if you were to go out enough light years away from the Earth, you see, and you were to tune in, and of course in your spacecraft you took along your cheap Radio Shack super heterodyne receiver, and you turned the antenna toward the planet Earth and you tuned it in, you could hear the Harding-Cox presidential election results coming at you. Those radio waves are still out there. They're still traveling out there. So it's somewhat humbling and, frankly, somewhat empowering to think that every bit of drivel I have ever spoken in this little room into this microphone is still out there somewhere. And someday somebody could find it. Some being from another world, or perhaps a being from our own world, who travels out far enough to get it. Imagine for a moment what some extraterrestrial traveler would think if they happened to tune in this station. What would they possibly make of it? Well, for a while there was this odd sort of music with instruments that sounded like the human voice or possibly other human bodily functions, and lots of long solos of percussive instruments. And then suddenly there were twangy guitars and some man with a very nice voice talking about drinking beer on Saturday night. And then, when that was over, this strange maniac came on and he raved for an hour about things, of course, that they could not possibly understand. Could they, gang? But you and I can, because we live here on this third rock from the sun, don't we? Well, at any rate, these words, too, are going up into the night sky, never perhaps to return, but never to stop either. And perhaps that's fitting, because tonight's story, tonight's tale, tonight's lecture is about an experience that's really common to all of us, except that most of us hide from the experience. Most of us, in fact, would do anything we possibly could to avoid the experience. But that's okay, because you see, occasionally it is thrust upon us, whether we want it to be thrust upon us or not. And it's about your own personal history, gang. What is the story that you tell yourself about you? When you think back on your life, exactly what is the narrative? Now, every country, every civilization has its historical narrative. That goes back to the beginning of cave times, you see. And inevitably, in these narratives, there are heroes and villains. There are morals to the story. And the stories, even if they purport to be actual history, are seldom objectively true. There is, in fact, very little in the way of objective history anyway. Yes, there are commonly agreed upon dates and facts and figures who lived and died. But the story that's told about them, the narrative, the point of it all, that's all open to conjecture. But that conjecture is typically spun in a way that makes any civilization the hero. Karl Marx was a great one for that, of course. The entire communist world before it fell was based on something called the Marxist dialectic. And that is a story predicated on the fact that all of history, in fact, is nothing but the story of the proletariat struggling against the evil forces of the bourgeoisie. That was the basic narrative. That was the basic the basic tale that explained everything. And all history was conformed to fit that narrative. Of course, here in this country, we are, after all, a nation of pioneers, a nation of revolutionaries, a nation of people who came from somewhere else and had to beat back the wilderness and set up a civilization and rebel against the oppressive forces of Great Britain and the Old World. And our narrative essentially has a lot to do with that. Then, of course, there is revisionist history that comes along. This is when other groups come along, and they don't like the prevailing narrative because it doesn't paint them in a good light. The American Indian, for example, didn't really have much going on in the American history narrative, so there was a lot of revisionist history that went on. So in the original way the tale was told, the lie was, and I'm going to call it a lie because most of these narratives are lies, the lie was that the noble white man came to these shores to escape oppression, both political and religious, settled the wilderness, pushed back the savage, and created the American civilization. And of course, we all know that large parts of that are just pure poppycock. That in point of fact, there were a lot of criminals, opportunists, and really nasty people who came here. And they fought with each other, and they killed a lot of people, and it was not always a pretty story, noble though the intent may have been. Of course, then along came the revisionists, back in the 60s and the 70s, you see. Then it went the other way. Then all Native Americans, the people that were here, they were all noble, you see. They were all noble and wonderful and good and true. And somehow the fact that, the facts of Indian massacres of settlers, that was just sort of swept under the carpet, you see. Scalping was not often discussed in that version of revisionist history. But we as people, we as human beings, we want to be the star of our own movie. The only way, in fact, I think we get along from day to day is to tell ourselves a story about ourselves that we want to hear about ourselves. Remember, gang, Hitler thought he was the good guy. It's true. When Stalin woke up in the morning, he didn't look in the mirror and see a butcher. He didn't look in the mirror and see one of the great villains of the 20th century. He saw a great leader of the vanguard of the future, the Soviet ideal, and the fact that he had to exterminate a few million people here or there, the fact that the kulaks had to go, and the re-education camps, and, that was just a means to an end, you see. That was his narrative. As a matter of fact, this is going to come as a horrible shock to some of you who think that all went away, but in his birthplace, in his native Georgia, which, like the Ukraine, which is currently being invaded, is trying to be its own independent country, and is its own independent country now. The Stalin birthplace is still a happening place to go. It's a little bit like the Washington Monument. It's a little bit like going to Monticello. Now, they have the perfunctory sign on the wall which says, this museum is an example of Soviet revisionist history, and is not to be taken literally. But that's a very small sign. Mostly it says, hey, Stalin was a kind of a cool cat, man. He was a world-changing figure, and guess what? He was born right here in humble little Georgia. So that's their version of history. So what do you tell yourself about yourself? Are you ultimately the hero of every story? Are you always the good guy, or perhaps sometimes you're the victim? If things don't work out, is it because of circumstances beyond your control? Are you, in fact, in your own narrative, noble and true and clear-eyed and always striving, ever upward? Or do you ever look in the mirror and actually let yourself see who you are? Now, it could well be that none of us could go on if we did that, and I suspect that that's true. But the amount of self-delusion with which we're all comfortable is quite frightening. Unless, of course, you have no choice. Now, some people have to come face to face with who they are because ultimately they end up on a therapist's couch somewhere. They were no longer able to cope with life. Their delusion became so incredibly intense, and their version of reality became so separated from anything objective that the rest of the world could see that at some point they stepped over that fine line into the shadow world of the schizophrenic. But for most of us, it just stays a controlled kind of a madness, doesn't it, gang? Yeah, nothing that would get us locked up or put away. Just our own little quirk. Our own odd little take on things. And I would say that most of us can go through life completely self-deluded. But there are lurking all around us, some intentional and some unintentional, traps, mirrors, things that will force us to look square-eyed into the reality and the truth of what we were once and probably still are. Now, I tell lots of stories here, gang. Some of the stories I've told here over the past 5.5 years are literal recollections of my childhood and my early adulthood. And, I tell stories with themes and morals, typically. Here's this wacky, crazy thing that happened to me, and here's the lesson I learned. Or, That happened, and that's what made me into the person I am today. Now, some of the stories are, as I say, literally true. Some of them are, they have been molded by artistic license, but they're based on truth, and some of them are complete invention. So the books I speak here, the work I do here, runs the gamut from autobiography to what could best be described as metaphor, perhaps, to just out-and-out novels. And of course, you wouldn't want to listen to these stories if I was always the good guy or the hero, so I've learned the art of self-deprecating humor. And in reality, I can certainly laugh at myself, and most of these stories involve some kind of a disaster that I got involved with somewhere, and that kind of makes them entertaining and fun because there's a little humor in that, and you can always feel a little bit superior to the primary character in a story who screws up, or who's a kid who's just learning something. But I've never really told a story where I was just an absolute clot. I mean, I've never told a story that didn't have some kind of redeeming value somewhere. But I'm going to tell one tonight. Now, why, you say? Why? Why would you pick this lovely, spring-like Saturday night? The first night, in fact, when the awful, howling blackness of winter appears to finally be lifting. When there's a lightness in the air. Why tonight of all nights would you pick this dark tale? Why would you pick this night of all nights to plumb to the depths of your soul, if in fact you can even believe me, if I am in fact telling you a true story, or if in fact it's a metaphor, or if in fact it's a complete fabrication? You don't really know, do you? No, you don't. This could just be performance art. Well, you can decide what's what and which is which. I'm here to tell you that this week, innocently, I was spending time on that work of Satan otherwise known as Facebook. I wish I had back all the hours I've wasted looking at Facebook. It would, clearly by now, I would have written a great novel, or cured some incurable disease. I certainly would be a much hipper and richer person if I had that time back and I had done something productive with it. So there's my victim narrative. But I was looking at Facebook, wasting time, doing nothing of value, scrolling through all of the innocuous drivel, the never-ending series of pictures of cute kitty cats and little inspirational sayings and humor that's been reposted again and again and again. And, of course, the inevitable political diatribe, which is ever so nuanced and where people try to understand each other at deep levels. Mostly has the tone of, "You guys are a bunch of creeps!" Strangely, I can't imagine why no one ever seems convinced by the other side. But I was innocently scrolling through this flotsam and jetsam of modern life. It is, by the way, if nothing else, a true Rosetta Stone of our American civilization. I would argue that if in fact it is possible for some future archaeologist to simply look at a random day of Facebook drivel, I think that that archaeologist would know all he or she needed to know about who we were as a people. They wouldn't need to read any official histories. It's all right there. So I was there scrolling along innocently when all of a sudden there was an image, a face staring out at me, not just from my computer screen, but across the mists of time, across the mists of, 30 years of time. It was smiling, innocuously enough, this face, this smiling face framed by blonde hair. And for the longest moment, I was transfixed by this face. What was this face, and why could I not look away from it? And why was I having this horrible reaction? Why was my stomach clenching? Why was I breaking out in a clammy sweat? Why was I simultaneously trying to look away, but yet riveted, unable to tear my eyes away from this sight in front of me? Now, to the casual observer staring over my shoulder, this was nothing more than, well, it appeared to be an old photograph. Yes, it was an old photograph from, looked to be somewhere back in the 80s based on the hairstyle and the dress. And there were two people in the photograph, actually. There was a young man, and in front of the young man was a birthday cake, and next to the young man was this blonde woman, this blonde young girl. And they were all laughing. Clearly, it appears to be the young man's birthday in the picture. There are candles involved. It seems to be an event of fun and frivolity and joy. Why, then, was I staring at it? Did I know these people? Obviously, there was something that made me look at this picture and not look away. Then I glanced up to see who put this image. Who is it that put this here for me to find? Was it just an accident? Was it put there intentionally? Was there some deeper meaning behind all of this, or was it just a coincidence? And I looked at the name. Of course, you know, on Facebook, it's almost becoming anonymous. By the time you've got 500 or 600 friends out there, of course, the definition of friend is really rather flimsy. But I looked at the name of the person who posted this picture, and the name I dimly recognized. I know that name. It's a man's name. It's a man's name that I remember from back in the 80s. Not somebody I knew particularly well, but somebody who was part of the scene here at the Jersey Shore back in the 80s. I'm not going to mention the name. No, there will be no names mentioned tonight. No, we don't need that. None of us need that. It's bad enough that I am going to be doing this confessional, this cleansing of the soul. By the way, gang, have you cleansed your soul lately? Have you taken the soul out for just a good spring cleaning, kind of taken it out there in the front yard and, hung it over the line and beat it with a big hammer to get all the dust out? Maybe jam that soul of yours in the washing machine and, put it on hot and, pour in some detergent. Let that old sucker tumble dry for about 20 minutes. Yeah, well, that's what I'm doing here tonight. So anyway, so I'm looking at this picture, see, and it begins to dawn on me. There's this person. I know this person, and the person next to that guy. See, I'm assuming now. I'm beginning to read. What does it say? Oh, this is my birthday party somewhere in the early 80s. Yes, and boy, look at that awful suit. And yeah, sure enough, it was a pretty awful suit. Really, objectively, the 70s and the 80s were really not fashion high points for any of us. So I'm looking at the awful suit, and then the little comment at the end. Fortunately, it's, saved by the lady next to me. ... No name given. The lady next to me. And then I look at the name, and I look at the face, and then it all begins to come back. Oh, and did it ever come back? I was, in fact, transfixed. I could not look away. Because there staring at me from my computer screen was absolute confirmation of who I really was once upon a time. Not the person I tried to tell everybody I was, not the person I wanted to be, mind you, but no, the person I really was. Because, gang, you know how you really know who you are? It's what you do when the crunch comes, It's what you do when the pressure's on. It's not what you say at cocktail parties. No. It's not your witty bon mots that you share with your friends. It certainly has nothing to do with hardly anything you've ever done in your career. It has nothing to do with the books you read or the TV shows you watch or the music you listen to. No. It's what you do when the crunch comes, baby. That's what determines who you are. As I stared at that picture, even after all those years, I knew who I really was.
Hello, old friend. What a strange coincidence to find you. It's been 15 years since we last met, but I still recognized you. So call the barman over here and let us fill our glasses. and drink a toast to olden times, where all our memories lie, where all our memories lie. Do you remember the time when we were young? Lowly, lowly, low. Outside the window, the frosty moonlight hung on the midnight snow. So we pulled our scarves around our faces in the night, huddled on the doorsteps where the fairy lights shone bright, singing Christmas carols while our breath hung in the light. It all comes back like yesterday. It almost seems like yesterday. Do you remember the changes as we grew? Slowly, slowly, slow, sneaking in the back way into movies after school for the evening show, chasing skinny blue jean girls across the building site, checking out the dance floor while the band played Hold Me Tight. See the blonde one over there, I bet she'd be alright. It all comes back like yesterday. It almost seems like yesterday. While I talked, he sat and he never made a sound, staring at the glass beside me. Friend, tell me what's on your mind. Silence grows on you like ivy, ivy. Do you remember the church across the sands? Holy, holy, holy. You stood outside and planned to travel to the lands where the pilgrims go. So you packed your world up inside a canvas sack, set off down the highway with your rings and Kerouac. Someone said they saw you in Nepal a long time back. Tell me why you look away. Don't you have a word to say? He said, I don't remember, I don't want to remember. In fact, I've heard too much already. I don't want to think, just leave me here to drink, wrapped up in the warmth of New York City. You just don't know, and you just don't understand me. Got no use for the tricks of modern times that tangle all my thoughts like ivy, ivy. So I left him and I went out to the street, lowly, low, where the red light girls were coming after me. $40 show. All across the city's heart, the lights were coming on. The hotel lift softly hummed a Cole Porter song. If I went to look for him, I knew he would be gone. A picture card of yesterday, a photograph of yesterday. I'm far off in a deserted part of town. The shadows like a silent army flooded out the rooms in pools of blue and brown, and stuck to all the walls like ivy, ivy, ivy.
So there I was, see? I had been hijacked. Mentally hijacked and hoodwinked. By someone who did what more and more people seem to do these days. They put these old pictures out there. Have you encountered this phenomenon as well? You know, you're just scrolling along and looking at all the flotsam and jetsam posted by your theoretical and so-called friends, when suddenly you're staring face-to-face at some 30-year-old image that may in fact have you in it. And your first response is generally to say, "Oh my God, what is that? Is that me?" And it is you. Or it's somebody else. I don't need these kinds of rude shocks to the system. Speaking of rude shocks to the system, you are listening to WCFA LP 101.5, and you know, one of the reasons I feel so comfortable tonight doing this, cleansing my soul, putting it through the great drip dry of life, is because I know that it's not like anybody hears me. Or do you? All right, you know, we're going to take a little brief respite here before I get to the end of this sad, horrid tale. And we're going to conduct a little broadcast experiment here. You know, for the longest time, we had the official Theater of the Mind countersign, which you could all use at Wawa, or if you encountered each other in public. You were supposed to say, "The eagle screams at midnight," and the other one said, "Trust no one." Well, we have a new countersign. A new countersign. And in fact, I challenge a listener, some listener, anywhere, if you're out there, to call me up with the new countersign. And here it is. The new countersign is, "Bright light shines on the bald head of truth." And the response is, "In a pig's eye." You got that one? Yeah. I did that wrong. Bright light shines on the bald head of truth in a pig's eye. So I challenge any listener, call me. Here, I'm going to give you, this is how much I trust you. I didn't even give out the number yet. I'm going to give my personal number. Here it is, okay? It's 609. Write this down. 609-408-6595. I want somebody, one of you, to call me up right now and say, "Bright light shines on the bald head of truth." And then I'll say to you, "In a pig's eye." I'm waiting. Well, that didn't take long at all. Hang on. Here, that is my official ring. Hold on, I think I've got a listener. Hang on just one second. Hello, listener?
Hello?
What do you have to say for yourself, listener?
This is what I have to say.
Yes?
In a pig's eye.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Thank you. I can go on now. Thank you. Thank you, listener. Thank you. Goodbye. That's close enough. All right. For a second, I thought it was just me. You are out there. Okay, fair enough. Well, let's plow on, shall we? Let's get to the bottom of this horrid disaster. So yeah, that's what happened to me. The same thing that's probably happened to you. I stared down and there's this picture. See, in the picture, the guy in the picture, I'm not going to name his name, but at one time, the phone's... We have another listener calling. Please stand by. Hello? Is this in a pig's eye? Thank you very much. All right, we've got more than one. Thank you so much. This is very, very good. I mean, I've now had 2 listeners call in with the official countersign. Thank you. It does an old man's heart good. Where was I? Oh yes. So there's this guy. See, he used to be once upon a time. He was on the radio here in this market. You could hear this guy's voice. Okay. And back when I lived here for the first time, back in the 80s, I was living in my tiny little house over in Town Bank that was roughly the size of a walk-in closet, and I was like in my 20s, see, and I was like making the scene big. I was living at the Jersey Shore, you know, and I had like a real grown-up job, and I had these great pretensions of being somebody, you know, and I was looking out over this wonderful, bright future, and of course the reality of my life didn't quite match all of that. It was mostly wannabe as opposed to what is. I had grown up in a fairly routine way. As I've mentioned before on the air, I didn't meet my first non-Catholic until I was about 12. I lived a pretty prescribed life, you know, and most of the people I knew were a lot like me, you know. Most of the women I dated were the kind of girls you had gone to high school with, you know, and you know they were all named typically they were named Marie or Mary or Anne or Angela or some version of that. They weren't particularly exotic. They were just your basic run-of-the-mill girls that you went out with, you see, and most of my friends fit the same description. But somehow I had my eyes on this other future that I was confident was coming. I knew it was just around the corner, you know. Little did I know that it was going to reveal itself. Thanks to this guy that was in the picture with that blonde-headed girl with the eyes I couldn't stop staring at. So it's 1983, see? And I'm at a place called the Red Garter. Do any of you remember the Red Garter? Yeah, the Red Garter. It used to be over there in Anglesey. The Red Garter, by the way, if you never had a chance to experience it, was one of the great folk experiences of all time. The Red Garter had a kind of an 1890s theme, and typically on any given night, there'd be somebody playing kind of like a honky-tonk piano thing. There was lots of beer, lots of peanuts, lots of singing and hollering and fist fights in the parking lot, but it was just an amazing place. You could go there and you could you could sing old songs, you could polka, it was in many ways what the Jersey Shore was at its best. Just a kind of a bawdy shirt tail out place. And it's where we used to hang out for some reason. We didn't go to sophisticated jazz clubs. No, they didn't exist anyway. You either went to the penalty box to drink beer in the summertime, and in the off-season, there was the Red Garter. And so I'm there on one particularly balmy spring evening, not unlike this evening, hanging out there with all of my friends, many of whom were in the radio business here, and this guy, the guy that's in the picture, he was there. That, I think, may have been the first time I ever met him. And he's with this blonde, see? Good-looking blonde, nice-looking woman. But, of course, clearly, he has marked his territory. This is clearly, as we used to say back in the day, this is his chick. So I respectfully did what all... There was a kind of a man code about this, you see. If that is clearly your chick, then I'm allowed to stare at her from across the bar, and I can exchange a few friendly greetings, but that's as far as it goes. And so I was being respectful of all that. But it became clear to me as the night wore on and as the beer pitchers drained and as the piano got louder and bawdier that this particular relationship had come upon the rocks, possibly had already sunk. And the fact that I was seeing them there together, this was just an echo of what had been. This was nothing that was currently happening. And so after asking a few surreptitious questions of this guy's friends, I found out that she was, quote-unquote, on the market, if you will. So I came over in my most suave and debonair manner that I certainly had back there when I was 20-something, back in the early 80s, and I said something really, I don't know, something to the effect of, "Hi, how you doing? Buy you a beer?" That line always worked. Something about the way I delivered it, perhaps. So we had that beer, and in the course of our conversation, I found out her name was Robin, see, but it was Robin with a Y. Robyn. I have learned in life to always be very careful around people who spell their names funny. Yes, Robin with a Y had a sister Ellen with a Y and a sister Karen with a Y. There were 3 of them, all spelled with a Y. But the amazing thing about this person was, and she was very nice, very attractive, and we talked for a while, and come to find out her father owns this travel agency, see? Big travel agency. And she's a travel agent, which at that particular time in my life sounded like one of the most glamorous and exotic things anybody could be. Travel agent. Because they got to go on these things called fam trips, which really means familiarization trip. Do you know what is it, a familiarization trip? That really is, by the way, back, I'm not sure if this still exists. That was one of the only bennies, the only perks of being a travel agent, was that you got to go on these trips for free. You know, so I began to date this girl, and a typical idea of a date for her was to call me up like on a Thursday and say, "Hey, you want to go to Montreal for the weekend?" And we would. All expenses paid. It was free, see? We'd be staying on the top floor of the Queen Elizabeth Hotel and eating in all these great 4-star restaurants, comped. As a matter of fact, not only was it comped, once they found out she was a travel agent, they would go out of their way to be nice. So here I am, see? I'm dating this very exotic chick with who spells her name funny, who periodically takes me, well, she'd call up and say, you want to go to France? Oh, sure. We'll just go to Paris. I'm beginning to think I've finally arrived. Life, at least life as I envisioned it, was finally starting. You see, because life as I envisioned it had me as a witty, urbane man of the world, you see. Someone who was accustomed to ordering fine wine in good restaurants. Someone who spoke several languages and often flew on the Concorde, when the Concorde existed. As opposed to who I really was, you know, which was a guy struggling to make a living, living in Townbank, New Jersey, who had friends named Clarence. That was the reality of my world. But this girl, you see, she looked like a path to something else. Now, here's the other exotic thing about this girl. She was Jewish. Yes. She was really the first Jewish person I got to know. I know you're thinking you were 20 years old, you never met a Jewish person, and I don't know why I'm talking like this. No, I didn't. It's just I didn't grow up around people that were anything but what I was. So this made her even more exotic. And that might sound quite pedestrian to you, but it sounded pretty exotic to me at the time. And of course, at one point, after about a month or two of this dating thing, I went home to meet the family. Now, of course, I'm very innocent. I, essentially met the families of any girl I had dated from the time I was in high school. And I was always, by the way, really good at charming parents. There were never a set of parents I couldn't make like me. It was one of my few skills. And so I don't think anything about this. Yeah, you go. Yeah, sure, come over for dinner. Oh, okay, we'll come for dinner. And so you come for dinner. And then I got to meet the rest of I got to meet the Ellen and the Karen with a Y. And I got to meet Sadie, the mom, and I got to meet Heischel, the father, who owned the travel agency. Because of him, I was going to exotic places. And they were very nice to me. And I got to eat real Jewish food. Have any of you eaten real Jewish food? I'm not talking about, Hebrew National hot dogs, gang. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about real Jewish soul food. This stuff hit me where I lived. It was amazing. I know it's basically simple. I mean, there's nothing all that exotic about it. You can only do so many things with these basic ingredients. And of course, I didn't even realize I was being invited over during, holidays, And I didn't know what these holidays were because I was just this innocent Catholic kid. Still, a tiny little voice in the back of my soul wondered if I was in fact going to hell for even being there, but I didn't care. The food was great, and Dad liked me, and Mom made a fuss over me, and even the two younger sisters would sit across on the other side of the table and sort of bat their eyes at me, and Clearly, I was a star in this house. And of course, I assumed I was a star because of course, I was witty and charming, and I could tell a really great story. I picked all the really, really good stories to tell. I mean, the ones that I knew were gonna really charm them. Which ones? Oh, yeah, sure. Hey, ever tell you the time about that time my old man got the Plymouth stuck in the mud in the front yard? Well, that was a real gasser. And I would tell these charming stories, and clearly they would hang on every word. I was weaving this wonderful spell. Even then, I was a storyteller in my own way. And this goes on. And I'm starting to think that, again, life has finally begun for me. What I was missing, however, all this time, what I guess I saw but didn't want to see, but I could clearly see in that photograph, even though it wasn't aimed at me when the picture was taken, in that circa 1983 photograph. Yeah, there's that smile and the blonde head, but look at those eyes. There's a certain predatory gleam in those eyes. The kind of a predatory gleam I suspect occasionally comes across the face of across the face of a mountain lion before it's about to pounce upon its prey. I don't doubt that it's the kind of predatory look that a wolf has as it saunters through a dark wood. A look which says, I will make you mine. But I didn't see that look, you see. I possibly at that time in my life, when I was in my 20s, didn't even have the ability to know what it meant. Until I began to keep my ears open. It sometimes takes a sledgehammer across the back of my head for me to get things. I'm not all that bright about much. But the fact is, I soon began to pick up a certain drift in the conversations at the dinner table, as they were passing around the potato pancakes and the gefilte fish, which, by the way, is an awesome meal if you've never had it. Potato pancakes and gefilte fish. So I'm sucking down the potato pancakes and the gefilte fish, and I'm kind of listening to some of the things that are being said, and it becomes clear to me that these people have a vision of my future too. And in their vision of my future, I'm related. Every now and again, references to, quote, the wedding, unquote, are made. At first I assumed that one of the sisters was getting married. I might have even asked that stupidly. And then it occurred to me, no, that's the other two. Aren't getting married. It's Robin with a Y. Yeah, she's the oldest sister, see. It's her turn. Why, gosh, she's going to be 24 soon. An old maid. And somehow I have been designated as the groom-to-be. Now, gang, you've got to believe me. In all of these exotic trips to all these wonderful places, I certainly was a guy, but I never once said that word. I never intimated it. I've thought long and hard. I had over the years. What did I say? Did I ever give anybody the idea? Did I give her that? No, it didn't matter, apparently. Now I was stuck in a classic quandary. I was living a life I dug, I was going to cool places. I was hanging out with this family, all of whom I really enjoyed. I had been made part of their world. I wasn't Jewish, no, but actually I think I was becoming an honorary Jewish person. I did. I even met, this is even more so, I met all the aunts and the uncles. I did. Is Uncle Irving? He has Aunt Mary. No, there's no Marys. What am I talking about? They would all come over, and they would all fuss over me and tell me I should eat more. And they would start bringing me kugel and Jewish apple cake, which, by the way, is another amazing delicacy. So I didn't want to lose all this, much less that I want to lose all these cool trips to places. Because, of course, by now I'd been bragging nonstop to, my friends like, Clarence and Frank about this cool life I was living. But yet, I knew that if I kept going down this road, that road was inevitably going to lead me to some place I didn't want to be. I wasn't ready to get married to anybody, and quite frankly, Well, the idea of it scared the bejesus out of me. It was the first time in my life that I came face to face with the ultimate rock and a hard place. How the hell do I get myself out of this? Well, of course, this was long before the days of the text message or any of that technology. Matter of fact, I am now told that most relationships end via text message. I'm not quite sure what the text message says, Dear John. Enough said. So I didn't have that option. It had to be face-to-face. Well, I guess I could have possibly used the telephone, but that just didn't occur to me. Even answering machines were kind of in their infancy then. I mean, they existed, but they were big clunky things from Radio Shack with big tape cassettes in them, and I don't think I even owned one back then. So time goes on. The quandary gets worse. I find myself literally being sucked into this pit. I used to have these recurring dreams of being stuck in quicksand and grasping with my fingernails, trying to hold on to the side, and I just kept sinking and sinking, and finally I knew I was reaching a breaking point. So we're having dinner one night. See, we're in this really swanky type restaurant in Center City, also comped. That's the best part. This was all free. And I'm sitting there and I'm staring at this lovely face framed with the blonde hair, and she's jabbering on about something. I excuse myself to go to the restroom. I'm standing there in the men's room staring at myself in the mirror. It's one of the first times I looked at my reflection, and the face that looked back at me was frankly shocking. My eyes were sunken. There were lines in my face. My God, is that a gray hair? Yes, I was literally falling apart before my very eyes. What am I going to do? And then I looked a little more closely at this face in the mirror, and I see over the face's right shoulder is a window. Yes, a window. A window that's, well, if I stand on the tank there behind the bowl on the john, I can probably get to the ledge where that window is, and it looks pretty easy to open, and I think I can probably get outside. And, well, gang, this is it. This is my admission. That's what I did. I left. I bolted. I ran. My feet hit that pavement outside that swanky Center City restaurant, and I started running for all I was worth. My feet were pumping as hard as they've ever pumped. I was rolling down that street, and I wouldn't stop. In fact, I didn't slow down. I kept running faster and faster, until finally, completely out of breath, I found a cab and got myself to where my car was and drove home. That very long, scary drive back to the Jersey Shore. And of course, it wasn't over. Oh no, it couldn't possibly be over that fast. Oh no. See, after that, I spent the next 3 months not answering the telephone. I literally spent one entire weekend hiding under the bed with the knocking on the door. Are you in there? We never spoke again. It occurred to me as I looked at that picture, I technically never really broke up with her. I just ran away. So you see, gang, that's my real history. When the crunch came, I bolted. And I spent weeks hiding in the bedroom closet next to the shoes. Yeah, that's my history. That's what I have to brag about. Sure, go ahead and smirk.
I'd say that was a pretty successful broadcast.